Welcome. My name is Leah Doozy. I'm a principal consultant with Compliance Services International. Today I'm going to be talking to you about AMMPS, a tool for informing discussions on avoidance, minimization, and other measures for pesticides and species. Before I begin, I would like to thank my co-authors, Ashley Frank, Tony Bird, and Lula Thaber-Michael. Under the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, or FIFRA, the registration of a pesticide requires compliance with the Endangered Species Act, or ESA, which includes evaluating the potential risk of the use of a pesticide on ESA-listed species in designated critical habitats. For the agencies responsible for registration and consultation, this can be an extensive exercise involving many complex data sets and processes. As demonstrated in recent draft biological evaluations and draft biological opinions from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the National Marine Fisheries Service, collectively known as the services. For the pesticide registrant seeking registration, this can present an opportunity to explore ways to adequately protect ESA-listed species while also considering what is feasible for the end user. We developed a tool, AMMPS, that indexes factors that are important to the analysis of risk as well as imperilment and conservation needs of each ESA-listed species. Before we talk about what AMMPS is, it's important to talk about what AMMPS is not. AMMPS is not a model, it's not a replacement for a risk assessment, it's not a replacement for a biological evaluation, and it is not a replacement for a biological opinion. It is a tool to identify species for which reasonable and prudent avoidance, minimization, and other measures may need to be explored to address potential risk from pesticides. It is also a way to sequence species by their degree of potential risk and vulnerability to assist EPA, the services, and applicants in discussions about suitable mitigation measures and options. Where does AMMPS fit into the FIFRA ESA process? We've identified 3 points where we think it fits into the process. The first is product development. Using AMMPS, registrants could develop protection strategies while still in the discovery stage. As it relates to registration review, AMMPS could fit in during the biological evaluation process. Stakeholders, applicants, and EPA could use the tool in discussions on potential protection options, such as label statements and bulletins. Additionally, as part of the biological opinion process, stakeholders, applicants, and EPA, along with Fish and Wildlife and the National Marine Fisheries Service, could use the tool in discussions on potential mitigation options or RPAs and RPMs, whether that's labels, label statements, bulletins, or compensatory measures. The overall concept and approach of AMMPS is to be flexible and adaptable. It's multi-factored, and it allows the users to select elements important to the sequencing question being considered. The user advances through the tool by applying factors in modules. Currently, there are 2 main modules: level of effects and exposure, and species vulnerability. The final module is a mitigation strategy bucket module, which allows species to be grouped to help guide discussions. So I'm going to go through the inputs and the outputs of AMMPS. The inputs. We have 2 modules, the level of effects and exposure module and the species vulnerability module. The level of effects and exposure module sequences species based on the potential for a pesticide registration action to have a negative effect. The module is flexible and can be used with factors from an existing pesticide biological evaluation or for a general pesticide class, such as herbicide, insecticide, if a biological evaluation is not available. We've included species attributes such as diet, size, obligates, pollination, as well as usage data, if it's available. We include general effects categories. As a reminder, this is not a replacement for a risk assessment, so we have kept the level of effects portion of the model generic. We also include use site overlap. This can be tailored to the use data layers, UDLs, or by crop. We can also include non-agricultural layers in here as well. The species vulnerability module Sequences species based on their vulnerability. Sequencing allows research and data development efforts to be devoted to the most vulnerable species. The factors are based on the status of each species and include listing status, environmental specificity, range size, population trends in size, and known stressors. Sourced from Fish and Wildlife and NMFS range maps, the documentation includes 5-year reviews, status of the species, recovery plans, etc. As a note on the stressors, this does not include just pesticides, but includes all contaminants, as well as water quality and other keywords related to contaminants. As far as output goes, everything is based around the sequence of the species. This is either by individual module or by a combined module. We can also sequence species within the mitigation strategy buckets. These buckets are a data management tool. Species are organized within each bucket based on sequencing results from modules to help focus discussions. To guide discussions on if and where mitigations may be needed, the tool groups species into buckets that represent various strategies based on, but not limited to, usage within the range, size of species range, designation of critical habitat. To guide discussions on what mitigations might be needed, the tool further groups species into sub-buckets based on the level of effects and exposure module and the species vulnerability module. These sequences are outputted as graphs, maps, or a data table. However, the output can be tailored to the process and the associated data needs to answer the questions posed. This is the front page to AMMPS. AMMPS is a shiny web application created in RStudio. Currently, it includes the contiguous United States. The species ranges in critical habitat are current as of July 2021. We do keep this updated regularly. You can see you have a choice to look at the data table, a species scatter plot and data, species density map and data, as well as draft biological evaluation results if applicable, and there are species reports options. Species vulnerability by range is one of the scatter plot options. The axes can be changed to answer different questions. This has been filtered just for flowering plants. You'll notice this jewel flower has a very small range, but yet has high species vulnerability. I will note that this also has very low overlap with cultivated land, around 0.2%. On the other hand, you have the eastern and western prairie fringed orchid, which have much larger ranges, but sort of a median species vulnerability index, as well as a higher overlap with cultivated land. So there are different ways that you can filter these data to answer the questions that are being posed. We can also look at the same data using a species density map by county. You'll notice that I have it filtered by mitigation strategy bucket and sub-bucket. So with the sub-bucket, this would be species with the highest level of effects and exposure and the highest species vulnerability. And I still have it filtered by taxon, so for flowering plants. You'll notice Polk County, Florida has 12 flowering plants that fall into these strategy buckets and this sub-bucket, as compared to Kitson County, Minnesota, which has 1 flowering plant, which happens to be the western prairie fringed orchid. And then in California, Sonoma County has 15 flowering plants that fall into these filtered combinations. The data is also provided as a data table along with the map. So our future steps. We would like to include intensity of use within the range for a general herbicide and insecticide. So that would be regardless of product, just intensity of use. We would also like to explore pesticide mode of action, route of exposure, formulation, and application factors that may better inform the level of effects and exposure module. Additionally, exploring how geographic, taxonomic, life form, and other ways that might be available to group data that may allow for a more helpful guidance of discussions. As always, with a tool of this nature, we're incorporating new and updated data constantly and as it becomes available. Lastly, we would like to explore how the mitigation sequence, avoid, minimize, compensatory actions can be implemented and how the data can be sequenced to inform when mitigations across species versus species-specific mitigations are appropriate. There's a lot of information in the tool, and I've gone through it very quickly for this presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. My information is provided here, and thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the conference.